Salam Sejahtera and hello everyone. Thank you for joining us in this webinar on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on global energy market. I am Siti Indati, Director of Institute of Energy Policy and Research, or in short IEPRe. In case you are not familiar with IEPRe is one of the 5 research institutes at Universiti Tenaga Nasional, UNITEN, that was established in 11 August 2009 to spearhead research and consultancy, as well as capacity building activities related to energy economics in the country. IEPRe received strong support from Energy Commission and Tenaga Nasional Berhad. To support our establishment, the Chair in Energy Economics of Energy Commission at IEPRe has been established in 2010. Professor Dr. Ken Koyama is the current chairholder who is mandated to provide the leadership and strategic directions to strengthen IEPRe's capacity and capability towards achieving research excellence in the 6 key research areas, namely energy economics, energy security, energy policy, energy and environment, energy and social sustainability, and energy supply industry. In today's webinar, we are very pleased to have Prof. Ken Koyama virtually on board with us to discuss an important topic on how the ongoing COVID-19 has changed the global energy scene. We will get a review of the latest IEJ analysis of the COVID-19 pandemic impact on the global energy market with a specific focus on oil, natural gas, and LNG demand. Let me introduce Prof. Ken Koyama. He is currently the Chair in Energy Economics of Energy Commission at UNITEN, who also the Chief Economist and Managing Director of the Institute of Energy Economics, Japan, or in short IEEJ. He received his bachelor and master degrees in economics from Tokyo's Waseda University and his PhD from the University of Dundee. He joined the IEEJ in 1986 and has held various positions within the institute, such as Senior Economist, Head of the World Oil and Energy Group, as well as Senior Research Fellow in the Energy and Strategy Department. Alongside his current position, he is also a professor at the University of Tokyo's Graduate School of Public Policy since 2010. So that's briefly about Prof. Ken. I'm pleased to thank all of you for joining the first webinar organized by IEPRe. Due to COVID-19, we are embracing new normal energy talk with the webinar. Allow me to sincerely record our appreciation for your presence today in discussing the topic of the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on global energy market, and hope we have a fruitful webinar. Before we move on to Prof. Ken's presentation, I would like to draw to your attention that you can key in your questions anytime in the control panel. We will address the question at the end of Prof. Ken's presentation. Also, please remember to complete the feedback form via the link available in the control panel at the end of the webinar. Without further ado, please welcome Prof. Ken Koyama. Over to you, Prof. Ken Koyama.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Siti, for your very kind introduction of the webinar and very kind introduction of myself. Very good morning to you all. I'm very happy to join this webinar to talk about the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on global energy market. I do believe this is a very, very important, timely issue for everyone who are interested in energy matters, or all the energy stakeholders in Malaysia, in Japan, in Asia, and in the world. So far, we are now seeing a very, very serious impact of the pandemic. More than 4 million people are infected, and almost 300,000 people died because of the pandemic. We are experiencing a very serious negative impact on our society, our economy, our civil life, and everything was very much affected in an unprecedented manner. The energy market is included as the area of seriously affected. And can you move the slide, or can I do it myself?
Yes, you can do it yourself, Prof. Ken.
Okay. I hope that you can see this slide, and I hope that you can hear me clearly. And let me start by showing this first slide. Of course, the pandemic is a very serious matter, but I would like to draw your attention that even before the pandemic started, the energy market, global energy market, this year sees oversupply. Of course, the pandemic outbreak started in China, developed into a pandemic, and world economy was seriously negatively affected since the Great Depression, and we are now experiencing very serious city lockdown, including the case for Malaysia, Japan, and many cities, many countries in Europe and United States. So under the circumstance, we are experiencing very, very substantial demand shock. Large number of energy demand evaporated. And on top of this demand shock, we also saw that the significant supply shock, which I'll come back on later. That led to the unprecedented oversupply, particularly at this moment, and extreme low price of energy, in particular for oil, and then go to the natural gas and LNG. And this extreme pain and terror resulted in the restoration of joint production cut by OPEC+. But I do believe so far the demand destruction overweighed the effort to reduce production. So I think that the supply glut and supply uncertainty, demand supply uncertainty will be the key word for this year and beyond. This simple chart illustrates the fluctuation of crude oil price. And you can see from this part, since March this year in particular, virtually the crude oil price collapsed, experiencing a free fall. And most typically, probably all of you remembered that the very unprecedented experience that WTI price recorded the minus price on April 19th. April 19th, WTI recorded minus $37. What does minus price mean? Put it simply, sellers could not find any buyers, so that sellers were forced to dispose their crude oil by paying additional money to find someone who are willing to dispose it. It's really unprecedented event. But of course, this unprecedented event was caused by some extreme conditions surrounding WTI contract. But the bottom line is that this was caused the extreme oversupply situation. Why oversupply situation? The first and foremost important issue is global economic serious recession. This is the table based on the IMF World Economic Outlook, and red character shows that the latest outlook published in April. That IMF latest analysis shows that the global GDP will contract by 3%. 3% contraction is really substantial. Many people compare the impact of this pandemic and Lehman crisis or Lehman shock or financial crisis in 2008-2009, but Lehman crisis global GDP contracted 0.1%. But this year, IMF project that global GDP is likely to contract by 3%. And this compared with the previous late outlook made by IMF itself 3 months ago, January 2020, IMF projected that the global GDP will grow at 3.3%. Just in 3 months' time, things and the world changed dramatically. And as you can see from this table, the most seriously affected, economically affected region is OECD, United States, Eurozone, Europe. This is because the pandemic hit hard in United States, in many European nations like Italy, Spain, UK, Germany, France. That's why the global economy focus on the OECD economy will contract very seriously. And I'd like to draw your attention here, the importance of the three functions or three elements for the economic activity, namely people, goods, and money. Well-functioning of people, goods, and money is really essential for economic activity. In normal time, in normal circumstance, no one pay attention to this. But when things get worse, we need to realize how important these three factors are. So under the current pandemic situation, I have to emphasize that the serious problem was the factor of people and goods are happening, which is causing the serious damage to real economy. And then money problem hits the wall and leading to the vicious cycle. And this can compare to the other previous crisis like Lehman crisis, which was started by the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers. As you can see, that the bankruptcy creates a money problem, which led to the financial crisis. Then it resulted in the damage to real economy. And we all remember before the pandemic started, the most serious economic threat to the world was US-China trade war. The world trade war, by definition, caused the problem for goods by added tariff war. And this goods problem caused a reduction on the world trade, and then money problem damaged the world economy. So I'd like to again draw attention that this pandemic, the most fundamental problem is damage to the well-functioning of the factor of people and goods, the real economy. And this has a real serious implication for the energy, because energy demand is mainly based on the function of people and goods, not money. So that's why, as I mentioned later, there is a very serious demand destruction caused by this pandemic. This is a chart based on IEJ's latest analysis and using the IMS economic forecast as a kind of benchmark. On your left-hand side, bar chart illustrates in the blue bar reference scenario for 2020. We assume that the global GDP will contract by 3%, as I mentioned earlier. But we also prepare the worst case of longer pandemic scenario, LPS, shown in red bar, where the global GDP for this year will contract by 6%. As you can see on the right-hand side, the trend by quarter, the red line, LPS, assume the bottom will come not in the second quarter, but in the third quarter. So the impact was prolonged and more serious for the case of LPS. What will happen in the oil market or oil demand? As you can see from this chart, the global oil demand will be reduced very, very significantly. 2019, the global oil demand recorded about 100 million barrels per day. But for this year, annual average, that the reference scenario will see about 10 million barrels per day reduction, and LPS, the global oil demand, will be reduced further. And most importantly, as you can see on your right-hand picture, the bottom of the oil demand will be seen in this quarter. Second quarter oil demand will decline very, very substantially, potentially almost 15, 16, and 20 million barrels per day, depending on the level of city lockdown, which I'll come back on later. Everybody knows that many countries in the world, including Malaysia, are experiencing some kind of regulation for the movement of people and goods and activity. We call, in some cases, lockdown. And under the lockdown situation, continuing lockdown situation, oil demand in particular will be very much affected. That's why our analysis shows that the bottom will happen in the Q2, this quarter, April to June period. And depending on the economic recovery, the oil demand will start to recover gradually for both reference case and long LPS. And this chart also illustrates the analysis of demand reduction versus 2020 level by region on your left-hand side and by product on the right-hand side. Put it very simply, by region, the oil demand will decline very significantly in United States and OECD Europe. And the reason is very, again, simple. These regions are most seriously affected by the pandemic and experiencing a very stringent city lockdown. Of course, the oil demand in China, non-OECD Asia, is also going to be reduced, but the impact is enormous in America and Europe. And by product, you can see very simply, very clearly, the demand for gasoline, demand for jet fuel, demand for gas oil, the transportation oil demand will be reduced very, very significantly. Again, this is because of the impact of city lockdown. So we need to ask ourselves the question, how long, how strong that this city lockdown situation can continue? And depending on the answer to this question, I do believe that the global oil demand pattern will be different for the months to come and maybe for the years to come. What about gas? And what about LNG? The global gas demand will project it to be reduced again very significantly. Natural gas is preferred as a very clean fuel, environmentally friendly fuel in the world. That's why global gas demand continues to see a very steady growth up to the year 2019. But you can see for both reference scenario and LPS, the global gas demand will decline. In particular for LPS, the demand level will much lower than the level in 2017. The gas market will be very much affected again. What about LNG? The same story applies to LNG as well. And you may remember that the global LNG demand saw that the very strong growth the year 2017, 2018, 2019. In some cases, we actually saw that the double-digit growth for LNG demand, driven by the growth in China, growth in many Asian countries, and in some cases in Europe. But LNG demand under the pandemic, both RS and LPS, it is quite sure that we will see that demand destruction. Again, this is a very, very unprecedented situation. Even the Lehman crisis in 2008-2009, global LNG demand did not see any reduction. 2009-2010, global energy demand continued to increase. But this year, we will see the demand for LNG will be reduced very much substantially. This chart then illustrates that which region we can see that the substantial demand reduction versus 2020 level. Right-hand side natural gas, left-hand side for natural gas, and right-hand side LNG. And the commonality is that the region which consumes most of these commodities, in other words, a major consuming area of these commodities will be seriously affected. In case of natural gas, the demand reduction happened in America, Europe, and former Soviet Union, which depends heavily on natural gas as an energy source in primary energy consumption. In LNG, you can see that the substantial demand reduction will happen in Europe, Asian OECD Oceania, and China and other non-OECD Asian countries. Actually, Europe and Asia as a total will account 90% of global LNG demand reduction as compared to 2020 level. So the effect of pandemic has a very big implication for the major consuming area of LNG and major consuming of natural gas. And at this moment, I'd like to draw your attention about the impact of lockdown based on IEJ's analysis. We made a lot of assumptions how that the city lockdown will be conducted in many countries in the world, and the summarized result is shown in the map. You can see the demand reduction volume in Asia is substantial. But you can also clearly note that the demand reduction level in North America and Europe is much bigger than the case for Asia, which means that the city lockdown effect is centering on the effect in America and Europe, because these are the countries and regions which are now experiencing most serious implementation of city lockdown. In Asia, the large number of people are under city lockdown, but we need to understand that the per capita energy consumption in Asia is much, much lower than those in the United States and Europe. So that's why when the city lockdown is conducted, the demand destruction happened very serious in OECD nations. And this chart also illustrates the effect of lockdown for final energy consumption reduction for the upper part of the chart, and the primary energy reduction in the lower part of the chart. For the upper part of the chart, you can see the demand reduction is centering on oil by energy source and transportation by energy sector. That's why if we go to bottom part of the chart, the oil demand reduction is most serious. Of course, the gas demand, coal demand under the lockdown effect will see the significant decline. Gas demand will see that the 10% decline, coal demand 8%, but oil demand will experience 20% reduction simply because of the effect of city lockdown. Again, I have to mention that the question mark is how long and how strong and how many countries, how many population are going to under the implementation of city lockdown is a very important issue for the global energy market. And in normal circumstance, when demand was reduced, of course, supply side need to play a role of supply-demand adjustment for the purpose of market stability. But what happened in early March was contrary to the stabilization. March 6, you may remember that Russia rejected to enhance the joint production cut, and Saudi reversed its policy to increase the production, which means that the price fall. So that's why in March time, WTI continued to decline, and finally it led to the almost $20 under the demand shock. And this extreme low oil price situation resulted in the Mr. Trump mediation between Russia and Saudi, and Saudi called for the emergency meeting for OPEC+, and this emergency meeting resulted in the agreement of unprecedented 9.7 million barrels per day production cut from May this month by OPEC+ nations. It is very interesting to pay attention to what happened in the major players like Russia, Saudi, and the United States. And in case of Russia, why they firstly rejected the joint production. I think that this is based on Mr. Putin's strategic decision that joining and enhancing that OPEC+ cap simply benefit US shale oil, which is high-cost oil production, and benefiting US shale oil is not acceptable based on the Russian national interest because of the conflict between the two nations. And when they rejected the joint production, Russia argued that the Russian bear low oil price longer than Saudi Arabia, it's a rival. Russia said that their physical break-even oil price for their budget is around $40, while Saudi break-even price is calculated at around $70, $80 per barrel. But I do believe that the impact of current low oil price is much bigger than its anticipation or its pre-calculation. And in particular, what I explained earlier, that the pandemic damaged European market very seriously. That the European market, you may remember, you know well, it's Russia's main energy outlet. So pain was too acute for Russia to do nothing. What about Saudi? There are many conditions which suggest the preference to higher prices. As I mentioned, that the Saudi's physical break-even price is now calculated at around $70 or $80, probably the one with the highest crude oil price needed for the nation's economic activity, economic stability. But Saudi continued to emphasize on the joint production cut based on the very bad experience in 1980s when they played a swing producer's role. But once the recent joint production effort collapsed by Russian rejection, Saudi decided to reverse its strategy to go on price war. I think that this is based on the lose the battle to win the war strategy. The low oil price, the pain of low oil prices can become a driver for restoration of the joint cut later on, at the later stage. But even for Saudi situation, this pain was beyond anticipation. And more importantly, when Mr. Trump asked Saudi Arabia and Russia to reconsider the joint production cut, it's very difficult for Saudi to ignore this call from the friend from the United States. The situation in Europe, United States is also very, very complicated. US is known as a high cost producer. And when $20 crude oil price happened, it's gives a serious damage to shale revolution, which is a very big contributor for US prosperity, economic prosperity, and US energy dominance. US shale industry was very much seriously negatively affected, and low oil price caused lower New York stock price. So economic pain for Mr. Trump, who is going to see the election this year, was too strong. That's why he decided to go on the mediation for Russian-Saudi price war. And actually, he was successful to mediate this situation. But ironically, United States cannot join, just like OPEC Plus, to reduce production. The only possible way is US production is likely to be in the hand of the market mechanism, which means when the price is low, naturally that US production is going to decline. And I think this is happening. The question mark is now that inventory. Even if that OPEC Plus continue to reduce production, everybody are expecting that the inventory level continue to rise at a very, very rapid manner. And at some point, May or this month or next month, the global inventory may hit the limitation of physical capacity to store oil. And when it happens, the oil became valueless product. That's why we are continue to see some downward pressure continue to exist in the marketplace. Put it simply, 10 million barrels per day joint production cut is very substantial in the context of the historical level of the effort, but it's still not enough. Because the current oil demand contraction may be around 20 million barrels per day, and some people are saying that more than 20 million barrels per day. So I think that the oil price still has some downward pressure. But again, the important question is how the global economy can be on the path of the recovery. In other words, what was the pathway for the pandemic for this year and the next year? And as far as economic recovery starts in second half of this year, while the joint production cut continued, oil price may head for $30. But if pandemic continued to destabilize the world with uncertainty over the joint production cut, oil price may go down to be below $10. So far, it is very unpredictable, and the oil price continues to be very, very volatile. And in the last 2 weeks, we actually see some bounce back of oil price. This is because that many countries in the world started to ease the city lockdown, started to consider the restart of economic activity. That's why this has a perception, creates a perception that oil demand destruction will start to be eased. But so far, the situation is so uncertain, so no one can predict correctly. I think that there is still possibility of oil price has a negative downward pressure and going back to the very low level. What about the natural LNG? Even without the pandemic effect, IEJ predict that this year, 2020, global energy market will see that the substantial supply surplus. Shown in the blue bar, the supply capacity is 381 million tons, while the demand level pre-pandemic was projected at 369, but now RS and LPS the demand level is much lower. So we are going to see that the very strong demand-supply gap. That's why that the LNG spot price, which reflects the supply-demand fundamental, shown in the orange line, that the price level is something around $2 to $3 per million BTU, which is extremely low. And more interestingly, shown in the purple line, which is the Japan LNG average price, mostly indexed to crude oil price. So far, there is a big gap because there is a time lag of crude oil price linkage. And since the crude oil price started to collapse in March, 4 months, 5 months time, which means that this summer, we are going to see the very significant decline in the average long-term contract LNG price in Japan and in Asia. So in any way, the LNG price, long-term price, spot price will see the significant decline. So characteristic, the keyword for LNG market for this year is low price and oversupply situation. And oversupplied and low price, in particular low price, has a second effect to make it very difficult to go on the next stage of final investment decision for the next stage of LNG project. I have a concern over that currently we are seeing the significant oversupply, that because of the difficulty in FDI, this will create the supply shortage for the years to come. And why that the low oil price and oversupply situation in LNG is significant? The question mark is there's no OPEC plus in LNG market. The supply flexibility comes from, in some case, US LNG supply, which has some supply flexibility option. And for the contractual flexibility can be used at the maximum level. And even the operational flexibility can be used, but still oversupplied market remain longer than anticipated, which then create the longer term, mid-term, longer term supply problem for the future. And I'd like to draw your attention for another uncertainty for the next year, 2021. We prepared the RS and longer pandemic scenario, LPS, but for the year 2021 analysis, we prepared a third scenario, which is a pandemic second outbreak scenario, PSOS. In PSOS, the pandemic second wave may happen in the second quarter of next year. So in that case, the global GDP for next year will not recover at all. For RS and LPS, this year we are seeing a very negative global GDP, but next year we are seeing a very strong recovery for RS and LPS, but not for PSOS. The global oil demand for RS and LPS will recover to the level of 2019, but PSOS, we continue to see the very low oil price in the world, and same in natural gas and LNG. So whether or not we will see that the second outbreak or third outbreak will determine the course of global economy and global energy demand, and of course has a big implication for the global supply demand. And lastly, I'd like to mention something about the longer-term implication of COVID pandemic. The firstly, now because of the lower GDP and more importantly, the effect of city lockdown, the transportation demand declined. But it's not a short-term problem. It may not be a short-term. The transportation demand may structurally strain because of the substitution of digitalization or the use of IT technology, just like the case of this webinar. So oil demand restrained, and acceleration of electrification backed by the big use of IT, digitalization. So this may structurally change the pathway for the global energy transition. And another big question mark is a shift in the priority of 3Es. 3Es stands for the energy security, environmental protection, and economic efficiency. And before the pandemic outbreak, everybody in the global energy stakeholder paid very, very strong attention for the decarbonization or the climate change issues. But now the pandemic creates a big challenge for safety, survival, security. So under the circumstance, I think that the energy security may be highlighted in the new light. And also an important issue is the pandemic shed light on the importance of so-called big government. We all know that now the city lockdown, extremely strong economic policy is needed for the survival from the pandemic, which means that the government role is very much enhanced. And under the circumstance, we need to note that the rise of me first policy, me first trend, for the survival of own nation, for the survival of own citizen, and it may have an implication for the global geopolitics. And also, for the survival of their own citizen and nation, some kind of the priority, the self-sufficiency idea, the concept is now being emerged. So all these mean that some big shift in the policy arena or strategic arena for the many important players. So we have to pay attention what all these mean for the survival of our life and for survival of our nation and for what that means for the global society. And we also tried, finally, I'd like to draw your attention what that means for Malaysia. Of course, for Malaysia, the safety, health, security of your nation is a top priority for the policy planner. There's no doubt about that. And the economic situation, it is very, very serious damage for Malaysia, but not only for Malaysia, it's a global crisis. But clearly, you have to think about the economic recovery from very extremely difficult situation. The balance between the safety, health, survival, and economic recovery need to be carefully handled by the government. And also, you have to pay attention to the implication for the energy market situation for Malaysia. Of course, the energy market implication is very, very much complicated, but on total, on average, I think that there is a very negative implication for the Malaysian energy sector. And also, you have to pay attention to the balance between the 3E agenda for the future energy policy or energy strategic planning for your country. So I'll stop here and thank you very much for your listening. I'm very happy to have some discussion on based on my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Ken, for a very insightful presentation on the global energy economic perspective. Now we are in the Q&A session. We have received quite a number of questions over the 35 minutes presentation, and we have about 20 minutes for this session, and we will try to address all questions to Prof. Ken Koyama within the time frame. So if I can read for you for the first question, Prof. Ken.
Okay.
Can you elaborate on how the projection for the gas and LNG demand was made? What are the time slice and assumption that you use for reference and longer pandemic scenarios? That's the first question.
Let me answer rather briefly because of the many questions. I'd like to suggest to visit the IEJ website where you can find that report on these analysis in English. Since that late March, we conducted a series of efforts to make analysis on the impact of pandemic, which includes the impact of effect analysis of the city lockdown as well as the GDP reduction. And in short, that different scenario and LPS depend on that the IMF economic growth assumption for the world and by region. And mainly, we conducted a study on these economic growth number. And on top of that, we made some analysis on the effect of city lockdown. The demand for natural gas, demand for LNG is all based on these analysis. So I'd like to suggest to go to IJ website to see that the detailed assumption and that the study framework.
Thank you, Prof. The next question, this is, I think, very much related to the slide number 7 in terms of the projection as well. The question is, the global spread of the virus is increasing and its curve is not flattened yet. However, in your slide, it was presented that the turning point in energy demand is on the second quarter of the year. Why is it so? Prof. Ken?
The question is why that the second quarter demand is very much reduced.
Yeah, the turning point on the energy demand is actually on the second quarter.
Again, again, I'd like to ask the person who asked a question to see that the IJ's report, which gives a very good explanation. Again, very in short, the city lockdown effect is centering on this quarter, second quarter, and the IJ's analysis is based on the 60 days city lockdown in the world. Probably about 4 billion people in total are under the city lockdown for 60 days during the period of Q2. Based on a country situation, the city lockdown period is different by China or United States or Europe. We assume that the different timing of the city lockdown, but in total, the 60 days, 2 months period is the lockdown assumption employed in our analysis. So if we employ this 90 days city lockdown, I think that the demand level for Q2 is can be much lower. And if city lockdown is much longer, for example, 80 days beyond Q2, I think that the demand projection for Q3 will be affected. So much depends on the strength and length of the city lockdown. And if we assume, we assume that the city lockdown effect will center on only this quarter, that's why the demand for Q2 is so small. Okay.
Okay, another question, Prof. In your opinion, with the volatility of energy prices, will LNG detach from being indexed to oil and have own price market? Own price marker.
Okay, yeah, I think that this is again very complicated question. As shown in this slide, in average, all the LNG price in this region will be lowered for this year. But the question mark is there will be a difference between the various type of LNG cargo based on the difference in the contract. So far, that the crude oil linked long-term contract will be lowered with a 3 to 5 months time lag, which means that for summer this year, we will see the significant reduction in LNG price. And if our analysis is correct and LNG demand is seriously reduced, the spot price of LNG will also have a very, very strong downward pressure. The problem is that we cannot know at some point which LNG price linked to crude oil price or spot price is lower or higher. We don't know. And depending on the level of the gap between the two LNG price, and furthermore, LNG price based on the different mechanism, which is US LNG based on Henry Hub price, fixed price, there's a very complicated situation may happen. So I think that there creates a difficulty for the negotiation between the buyer and sellers of LNG in this region. But if LNG price reflecting the supply-demand fundamental continue to be the cheapest one, I think that the buyer may wish to shift to the more spot linkage or price mechanism which reflect the market condition in this region. But I think it will take time because of the nature of the LNG contract and because of the nature of buyer-seller relationship in this commodity. Historically, that the buyer-seller situation relation for LNG is based on the mutual prosperity, simply because of the long-term nature for this cost recovery. The huge initial investment is required for LNG, which is required to think some mechanism to have the cost recovery and stable cost recovery. But I think that there's a new player like China, India, emerging market economies, that the buyer-seller relationship is different from the traditional buyer-seller relationship. So as far as the new players increase its presence, I think that this will accelerate the shift in pricing in Asia. I hope that I can answer the question.
Thank you, Prof. Ken, for the explanation. But we go to the next question. You mentioned about the long-term implication of COVID-19. How does this affect the advances in transportation technology, and how far will this prolong the usage of ICE engine vehicle, considering that alternative technology could be more expensive comparatively?
Yes, I think that I got the point of the question. But my hypothesis here in this slide is, so far, transportation demand based on the ICE technology is a king of the transportation energy fuel. We drive the car, passenger vehicle, and fleet vehicle, and ships, and aircraft, all based on the oil product as a transportation fuel. But what happened under the pandemic is we need to survive for maintaining our health and safety and security, and to endure the situation without going out, using the telework and using the teleconference, web meeting, whatever, to reduce the need for transportation itself. It's not a matter of replacing of the new technology for transportation. So it's a replacement of transportation itself. And what happened in the last 2 months was we actually could manage to replace the transportation demand. As many people who attend this webinar knows, I was a frequent visitor to Malaysia as a chair in energy economics at the UNITEN to give a lecture, to make advisory, using the airplane. But now I can manage to do this by this technology. And when situation is normalized, I think that the most of the activity can be normalized. But I think that some portion of these transportation demand itself will be replaced by another technology. And of course, that the lower price will enhance the competitiveness of ICE. If we go to find out a new technology like electric vehicle or fuel cell vehicle, which may going to be more costly, ICE's competitiveness may be enhanced. But the question mark itself is transportation demand itself may going to be replaced by something else. Again, the question is, no one knows at what level these substitution will happen. If we assume there's a big substitution, oil demand will decline substantially, which may going to be the start of the end of oil era. But I don't know at what level. We are now still in the process of the pandemic. We are not going to see any quantitative effect of this structural change. This is a very important question mark when things are going to be normalized and we are going to see the post-pandemic or post-corona world. But clearly, this is a very important issue. Okay.
Okay, Prof. We take another a couple of questions.
Sure.
Right. So with the prolonged crude or gas price, would you imagine that the energy transition will be slowed down rather than accelerated, as much more fossil will be used rather than renewable energy?
Again, I think that this is an excellent question, which means that I would like to have the answer, its right answer itself, myself. But again, my hypothesis indicated in this chart is probably after post-pandemic era, many countries in the world will prioritize the concept of energy self-sufficiency because of the new light on that energy security. And under the circumstance, it may be possible to promote that the energy sources like renewable and like nuclear power or other energy source, even that the fossil fuel, which can be based on the indigenous domestic energy supply. And also another new concept for energy security is resilience. So with these combination, every possible energy option can be reviewed. What is the best option for respective country to protect the nation and protect the citizen? So I think that clearly renewable and other indigenous energy sources can be prioritized. And another question is a combination of the importance of electrification. The stable, reliable, and affordable electricity source can be viewed as an important element for energy security. So again, if we need to consider the post-corona or post-pandemic world, it's still too early to say something very clear. Everything is still under the changing situation, under uncertain situation, but I would like to see that this will accelerate the global energy transition. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Prof. So I think can we go into another one question, Prof? Because of the time. Can we allow one question?
Okay.
Okay. The outbreak of COVID and its restricted movement order have lowered the global energy demand and CO2 emission. How will COVID-19 reshape the Asia's energy future, especially in the context of energy transition towards market liberalization?
Okay. I think that there is a possible shift in the energy policy priority. Of course, that protecting environment, protecting the earth from the greenhouse emission effect continue to be very important. I have no doubt that the climate change issue continue to remain as a policy agenda in the world and in Asia as well. But what I'd like to point out here is once we experience the serious crisis and challenge caused by the pandemic, there is clearly some shift inside among the priority. Environment issue continue to be in place as an important area, but survival becomes a very serious issue. And in particular, if we really see that the role of big government, the big government tend to pay attention to the survival of the nation in the very geopolitically difficult world, geopolitical tension high world, where possibly United States and China and the EU and Russia, big players, continue to play a geopolitical game. So I think that in Asia, we need to pay attention to the importance of security and affordability. Again, I continue to say that environmental issue will remain as important, but we need to be carefully reconsider the balancing of these energy policy agenda. And I think that this is same in Malaysia, in China, and in Japan when we consider the policy for 3 E's: energy market reform, energy market liberalization will continue to be the agenda, but we need to think, reconsider from the new environment or new surrounding that we need to realize for in particular, the post-pandemic or post-corona era. So I'd like to stop here.
Thank you very much, Prof. Ken. I think we need to end the webinar session. We are not able to answer all questions right now, but you can always reach out to IEPRe and Prof. Ken Koyama through our website. You can also download the slide from the Q&A control panel or IEPRe website. We would like to thank Prof. Ken Koyama for the sharing and making the time for this webinar. And to all participants, before you leave us, please remember to complete the feedback form via the link at the Q&A control panel after the webinar. Your feedback is very important to us. And once again, thank you for listening and participating in this webinar. Stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you very much.